Next, allegations of CIA drug trafficking. Monday, the House Select Committee on Intelligence heard testimony concerning a report alleging the agency's involvement in trafficking cocaine to the Los Angeles area. Florida Congressman Porter Goss chaired yesterday's hearing, which includes testimony from California Representatives Maxine Waters and Juanita Millender McDonald.
Sometimes they take it, sometimes it's lying. I can't tell anything. All that stuff they make.
Committee will be in order. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The committee, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, is here today to review the report of the CIA Inspector General regarding allegations made in a 1996 newspaper series that the CIA was involved in the trafficking of crack cocaine to California during the 1980s. Before we begin, I'd like to advise members and the public today of how we intend to proceed with the hearing. The House National Security Committee has graciously allowed us the use of this room this afternoon, and we appreciate it and say thank you for that. We have been advised, however, that our lease on this space does expire at approximately 5 o'clock, and so we're planning that our proceedings will end accordingly. At the conclusion of my opening statement, I will recognize my colleagues on the committee for any opening remarks they wish to make, and I'm advised they do. Then we will proceed to hear from members of Congress who are not on our committee who have indicated their interest in sharing their assessment of the CIA IG report. We will then proceed with the testimony of Mr. Frederick P. Hitz, the Inspector General of the CIA, beginning his presentation no later than 4 p.m. I thank all present here today for assisting us in sticking to this schedule. Today's hearing marks an important step in the ongoing process of inquiry the Intelligence Committee has undertaken to assess the validity of highly serious allegations presented in a three-part series of newspaper articles published in the San Jose Mercury News at the end of the summer of 1996. Those articles detailed allegations that the CIA was involved with or was somehow complicit in the trafficking of crack cocaine to California during the 1980s. The articles further allege that proceeds from those transactions were used to assist in financing the activities of the resistance movement in Nicaragua, known to most of us simply as the Contras. This committee undertook an investigation into these charges in the fall of 1996. Since that time, we have interviewed more than 24 individuals who may have knowledge or information relevant to the allegations put forth in the San Jose Mercury news stories. In addition, we have reviewed many thousands of pages of original documents from the CIA that have direct relevance to our inquiry. During this time, 2 separate Inspector General investigations have been conducted. The CIA IG's review, which is the subject of today's hearing, resulted in the public release in January of this year of Volume 1 of an expected 2-volume report. A second volume, which goes beyond the allegations relating to the California story, is, we are told, nearing completion. There has also been an investigation conducted by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Although that inquiry isn't concluded, we are told, we have also been advised that the Attorney General, the Department of DOJ, is for the time being withholding public release of the IG's report based on law enforcement concerns. As we proceed with our own inquiry, our committee is grateful for the work of the CIA IG on the matter before us. It is my judgment, based on a careful reading of Volume 1 of the report, which is a public document, that it is thorough and it represents months of careful review of the allegations and relevant facts pertaining to the allegations raised in the San Jose Mercury News. Given the serious nature of the allegations that had been raised, this investigation has to be especially thorough and persistent. Of course, we are continuing to conduct our own independent inquiry into this matter as part of our proper oversight responsibilities. We are keenly aware that this entire episode has fueled suspicions some people have about the advent of the scourge of crack cocaine in the United States. Any suggestion of government complicity in that terrible outcome is one that must be seriously considered and answered. It is our obligation as the committee charged with the responsibility of overseeing the CIA to address these concerns, to examine the facts as exhaustively as possible. It will be extremely difficult to come up with an absolute answer that will remove all doubt. Such is the nature of these cases. That said, I believe the American people have a right to expect us to do a conscientious job in understanding the facts and in offering conclusions from this committee about the charges that have been made. I believe that the CIA IG has presented our committee with a solid body of work that will assist us in that regard, and we intend to consider his conclusions very carefully. That is exactly what we are doing today, and what we will continue to do until we are satisfied that we have fully reviewed this matter. Our inquiry will continue as we proceed to conduct interviews and research as necessary. We will review the additional work product of the CIA IG when it becomes available to us, as well as the DOJ IG report when the Attorney General releases it. Additional hearings and public statements by this committee as to the progress of our work will be forthcoming as we deem appropriate in the committee. With that, let me again welcome our witness today, my colleagues, and I yield to Mr. Dix for opening remarks he may wish to make, and other members as well. We welcome Mrs. Harmon and Mr. Gibbons, who have come in since the gavel went down. Mr. Dix.
Mr. Chairman, it would be difficult to overstate the seriousness of the allegations generated by the series of articles that appeared in the San Jose Mercury News in August of 1996. That any agency of government would be charged with being associated with illegal activity is bad enough. That the allegations would involve the CIA, whose activities must necessarily take place in secret and are therefore not generally scrutinized by the public, make it worse. Add the fact that the illegal activity involved narcotics trafficking, one of the chief law enforcement and security challenges facing the nation. And the reason for concern in Congress, within the administration to include the President, and in the country should be obvious. Early in September of 1996, after being assured by Director of Central Intelligence John Deutsch that the CIA's Inspector General would conduct a thorough investigation of the issues raised by the Mercury News-ish series, I asked the committee's former chairman, Congressman Larry Combest, that our panel conduct its own inquiry. I commend Mr. Combest for his decision to authorize a committee review, and I commend our current chairman, Mr. Goss, for his decision in March of 1997, when he became chairman, to rededicate the committee to this effort as a priority in the 105th Congress. I continue to believe that as important as the reports of the CIA and the Justice Department Inspector Generals are, the committee's independent inquiry is essential. I've seen Mr. Hitz's investigation characterized as the most extensive undertaken by the Inspector General. The statistics on numbers of pages of documents reviewed and numbers of people interviewed are impressive. The task of proving a negative is always daunting, at least in part because you begin with the certain knowledge that you cannot reach conclusions with which everyone will agree. The best defense against unjustifiable criticism of an investigation of this kind, however, is to ensure that it is as exhaustive as possible. In the two-page summary of Volume 1 released by the CIA on January 29, 1998, the phrase, "no information has been found," was used 9 times. I want to be assured that this phrase was meant to convey the message that no information was found on a certain point because none existed, rather than the message that the information was not found because the effort to find it was not thorough enough. The public's judgment about the adequacy of the work of the Inspector General's investigators will be what ultimately sustains or calls into question the conclusions of this report. There have been published criticisms by at least one of those contacted by Mr. Hitz's staff that the interview seemed to be designed to go through the motions. I want Mr. Hitz, who I've known and have great respect for, to assure us that he is satisfied that the investigation was as thorough as necessary to uncover the facts on the matter at hand. I understand that a number of persons, almost all of them former CIA officials, either refused to be interviewed or sought to limit the interviews. At least one of the individuals who refused to be interviewed by the Inspector General showed no similar reluctance to be interviewed by the press. I consider the failure of these people to assist the Inspector General in this investigation to be inexcusable. The President, the Attorney General, and the Director of Central Intelligence promised the American people in 1996 that the executive branch's inquiry would get to the bottom of the Mercury News-related charges. That effort has not been helped by the decision by some individuals not to be cooperative. I look forward to discussing with these individuals soon the reasons for their decisions and the information they may have about the subject of the Inspector General's inquiry. When DCI Tenet released the Volume 1 report on January 29th, he noted that the concern at the CIA that the allegations had left an indelible impression that the CIA was somehow responsible for the inner-city drug scourge and that nothing could be done to undo that damage caused by that false impression. It is regrettable indeed that what was at stake for the CIA's reputation in this matter was not more clearly seen by all of those from whom the Inspector General sought cooperation. One of my chief concerns in this matter has been that the investigation not be too narrowly focused. I wrote to DCI Deutsch in September of 1996 advising him that I was particularly interested in the extent of knowledge by CIA officials of any involvement of members of the Nicaraguan Contras or individuals associated with them in drug-running activities, when that knowledge was obtained and what was done with the information. I was assured by a CIA official on September 17th that the Director shares your view that the extent and disposition of any knowledge by CIA officials of Contra involvement in drug trafficking must be assessed. I understand that much of that assessment takes place in Volume 2, and I look forward to discussing it with the Inspector General when that volume is made available to us. Mr. Chairman, I look forward as well to the comments our Congressional Committee will have on Mr. Hitz's work. I encourage them to make available to us any information they may have on the matters before us. I welcome them, and I welcome Mr. Hitz and his presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dix, very much. I have been advised other members wish to have opening remarks. At this time, I recognize the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Julian Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I join you and the ranking minority member in welcoming members of Congress and Mr. Fred Hitz, Inspector General of the Central Intelligence Agency. Let me begin by saying that I've read the Inspector General's report entitled Allegations of Connections Between the CIA and the Contras in Cocaine Trafficking in the United States, Volume 1, the California Story. I find the section of the report that chronicles the political history of Nicaragua from 1912, when U.S. Marines occupied Nicaragua to protect U.S. economic interests, until the elections of Viola Chamorro on February 25, 1990, was extremely valuable and insightful. For it's important to know that the Contras never were a single unitary organization. The term Contras, meaning counter-revolutionaries, was one used to identify organized forces opposed to the Sandinista regime. In my view, one cannot begin to understand the forces at play in Nicaragua's revolution without having this historical recounting as a foundation. It is apparent to me that Nicaraguans of various political persuasions made financial contributions to the Contras and to the Sandinistas. Some of these contributions were undoubtedly the results of proceeds from illegal activities such as narcotics trafficking. Nevertheless, the mere fact that an organization receives support from the fruits of illegal activities does not necessarily mean that the organization itself nor its causes are illegitimate. For example, Ricky Ross acknowledges donating some of his crack proceeds to inner-city community programs. These programs provide alternative after-school activities for our youth and are worthwhile and valuable, and in no way are diminished by the fact that some drug proceeds contributed to the operating capabilities. As has been said by the chairman and the ranking member, we're here today as a result of a three-part series of articles entitled Dark Alliance, published in the San Jose Mercury News. This series of articles allege that the CIA, in conjunction with the Nicaraguan drug network introduce crack cocaine into Los Angeles, and then funnel proceeds from the sales of crack to Contras to help fund their war against the ruling Sandinista government. In the high speed of the digital age of information technology, the Dark Alliance series quickly spread from beyond the Mercury News readers. The series was placed on the paper's website of the Internet, where, according to the Mercury News, it received more than 1,000 hits a week. Additionally, talk show stations made it their leading story for weeks, and network television gave considerable time to reporting the story on the evening news. The fact that the story has resonated so powerfully outside the minority communities should not come as a surprise. The plague of crack is no different from the way that alcohol and other drugs have infiltrated communities across America, leaving a path of death and destruction in its wake. There are no sole alliances between crack cocaine and minority communities. The spread of crack cocaine in predominantly majority suburban communities is well documented and no longer remains a secret. Whether drug use occurs in minority or majority communities is not the issue. I firmly believe that we in Congress, as well as the administration, have placed a tremendous amount of emphasis as well as dedicated resources to efforts designed to combat narcotics. Drugs tear at the very fiber of our nation, the family structure. Caucasian, Asian, African American, and Hispanic families have begun to be destabilized by drugs, resulting in lost generations of our youth and raising drug-related crimes. The allegation that an entity of the federal government may have been involved in the trafficking of crack cocaine in any community of America are serious charges and deserve the attention of the highest level of government. As a demonstration of the seriousness attached to the Mercury News allegations, as Mr. Dix has indicated, the former director of Central Intelligence Agency, John Dortch, made an appearance in South Central Los Angeles to reaffirm his commitment to undertake a thorough internal investigation and to definitively respond to all questions surrounding this matter. Today's hearing is an extension of this committee's commitment to effectively discharge our oversight responsibility and independently investigate the allegations raised by this series of articles. In the aftermath of the Mercury News series, a number of newspapers initiated their own investigation of the allegations of CIA involvement in drug trafficking in support of the Contras. The Los Angeles Times was one newspaper and concluded, and I quote, that crack epidemic in Los Angeles followed no blueprint or master plan. It was not orchestrated by the Contras or the CIA or any single drug ring. No one trafficker, even the kingpins who sold thousands of kilos and pocketed millions of dollars, ever came close to monopolizing the trade, end of quote. The New York Times and the Washington Post, too, reached similar conclusions as a result of their own independent investigation. After allegations raised by a postscript Mercury News article is that within 48 hours of the execution of a search warrant by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department on a number of alleged Contra sympathizers, CIA agents showed up at the Sheriff's Department and removed evidence that had been seized. The Sheriff's Department of Los Angeles County has investigated these allegations, along with assertions that local narcotics agents knew that a drug ring operated by Nicaraguan Contra rebels was selling large amounts of cocaine and using the profits to support the armed conflict in Nicaragua. The Sheriff's Department's investigation concluded that no evidence had been found and that no materials had been removed from their custody by anybody, and that there was no evidence to support the claim that local law enforcement officers knew of a Nicaraguan-backed cocaine ring. The House Intelligence Committee is in possession of a 4-volume sheriff's report totaling more than 4,000 papers. On Sunday, May 11th, the San Jose Mercury News executive editor, Jerry Seps, wrote an article entitled "To the Readers of Our Dark Alliance Series." that identified certain shortcomings in the Dark Alliance article. Specifically, Mr. Seps asserted that, quote, in a few instances, we presented only one interpretation of complicated, sometimes conflicting pieces of evidence. In one instance, we did not include information that contradicted a central assertion of the series. We made our best estimate of how much money was involved, but we failed to label it as an estimate and instead reported it as fact. We oversimplified the complex issue of how crack epidemic in America grew, and through the imprecise language and graphics, we created impressions that were open to misinterpretation. Notwithstanding the conclusions, Mr. Chairman, by various newspapers, the Seps article, the Sheriff's Department internal investigation, and the CIA Inspector General, this committee firmly has a responsibility to independently review the Dark Alliance series. Our investigations are no substitute for the role this committee has in reviewing these serious allegations. We have convened today's hearing as one step, only one step in our investigatory process, and we are determined to discharge our oversight responsibility in a thorough and professional manner. To that end, I recognize that no matter how thorough any investigation may be, there will be skeptics who will challenge whatever conclusions are reached. It is not possible to persuade every individual with preordained conclusions to change them. What we will do is present the facts as we find them and then make conclusions based on these facts. Mr. Chairman, as earlier stated, although the San Jose Mercury News Dark Alliance series deals with the African American community in South Central Los Angeles, this issue impacts all Americans. The possibility that the government may have been involved in drug trafficking activities threatens the credibility of all government agencies and entities. A government of the people and by the people must not be permitted to engage in such activities. When allegations of government abuse come to our attention, we're obligated to use whatever resources necessary to fully and professionally investigate the charges. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank the committee staff who have, in my view, diligently worked on this investigation to date. There is a lot of work to be done, but I appreciate the cooperation that we have received from our staffs.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. I would like to point out that I, too, am grateful for the particular attention you have given this matter. Surely, with your many duties, the extra work you've put in on this is well noticed and much appreciated. I'd like to advise members who came in late that we have two speakers I know of, two of our colleagues who wish to address us, and they've been advised they will have about 10 minutes each. We are trying to start Mr. Hitz at 4 o'clock. If you'll look at the clock on the wall, you will understand my admonition that the opening statements be kept within reason, please. Mr. Skelton.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I join my colleagues in welcoming our congressional witnesses and the Inspector General of the Central Intelligence Agency, Mr. Fred Hitz, to our committee this afternoon. As the ranking Democratic committee of the National Security Committee, I'm well aware of the commitment that our nation's defense establishment has made to combating the importation of drugs into our country. An allegation that an agency of the federal government is alleged to have been involved in trafficking cocaine into the United States, while other federal agencies, including the Defense Department, are dedicating personnel and resources to fighting a war against drugs, Mr. Chairman, is horrendous. I'm pleased that this committee is investigating these allegations and to the greatest extent possible holding hearings in a public forum so that the American public can review our proceedings. It's important that any inquiry to first obtain all the facts is necessary. Once the facts are collected, they can be analyzed and conclusions can be reached. Today's hearing is part of the information gathering process. The facts brought out by this hearing will become part of the factual basis that this committee uses to reach a final conclusion. As has already been stated by my colleagues, the CIA Inspector General is working on Volume 2 of his report that addresses matters related to CIA's knowledge of drug trafficking by the Contras or persons associated with the Contra movement. Additionally, the Justice Department Inspector General has completed his report and the committee is awaiting its receipt. I do not believe it's possible to reach conclusions until all the facts have been received. I look forward to today's testimony in the hopes that it will shed additional light on this matter. I also want to commend Mr. Fred Hitz and thank him for his service and dedication as the CIA's Inspector General. The position of Inspector General is often a lonely one. Frequently, Inspectors General are criticized by the public when their reports do not verify alleged misconduct and their objectivity is then called into question. Within an agency, the Inspector General is sometimes viewed as the villain who is out to harm the image and reputation of the agency. Mr. Hitz, you've weathered all types of criticism and have always maintained a professional attitude. I wish you all the best in whatever the future holds for you, and again, thank you for your service. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skelton. Ms. Harman of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a statement which I'd like to submit for the record, but I would, however, like to make a couple of summary points. First, I'd like to point out to the audience that a majority of the committee members are here, and I think that that speaks to the importance that we give to this issue. And I, too, would like to commend our colleague, Mr. Dixon, for his enormous personal attention on behalf of all of us. Second point, I did participate in 2 community forums hosted by our colleague, Ms. Melinda McDonald. I'd like to commend her for the work that she did and the abuse that she took and the effect it had on this member to clarify for me how really explosive this issue is in a community that has been racked by cocaine abuse, and I want to state to her and to all of you how seriously I take this issue. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that at the root of all this is one word: trust. A democratic society simply cannot function if the people believe that government agencies and officials participate in or condone illegal activities. And restoring trust will not be easy, but it is nonetheless an essential exercise for this committee. Speaking for one member, we cannot shirk from that responsibility, nor do I feel we will. And I want to thank you for a few minutes of time. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Harman, very much. Ms. Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you and our ranking member for having this public hearing, unusual one for us on this committee. And I, too, want to commend Mr. Dixon for the attention the leadership that he has provided on this issue. I still have many questions, and I look forward to the Inspector General's presentation as well as the other witnesses here today. This is an issue of great concern in my community, San Francisco, that I represent in the Congress. For a long time, before this issue ever came to the forefront, there was a suspicion in our community that the African American community was a target, particularly women in the African American community were a target of a campaign to provide crack to them. The suspicions were that this would be to lead to undermining the African American community by undermining the family. It's a terrible, terrible thought, but people did come together in large meetings in our community on this subject long before this issue that we're dealing with today was involved. Add to that, around the same time, the Contra issue debate was raging in the Congress of the United States. We know how long the Iran-Contra hearings went on to see if there was a sale of weapons to Iran, profits of which to be diverted to the Contras, circumventing Congress on that issue. So when this issue became public, there was already a foundation of distrust. And while we all know, many of us know more about the valuable contribution the Central Intelligence Agency has made, we also know of some shortcomings in the trust department between the American people and the agency. So you have a climate where people are saying what's happening to our community, crack, the cheapness of it, the availability of it, is undermining our community. Who's doing this to us? Secondly, why isn't somebody, how can we stop it? Therefore, when this story hit, there was a climate that made it a credible story. I myself do not think that the so-called retraction of the San Jose Mercury News was that weighty. It was, you know, a few instances we did this. We did not include an assertion that contradicted. We're in error about the money and oversimplified. That's not exactly a major retraction. So I still have, and my constituents, more importantly, my constituents still have some serious questions about this, as well as the particular interest that we have in the frogman, less attention has been paid to allegations concerning Northern California, particularly the so-called frogman case. During the prosecution of this case, the U.S. Attorney for Northern District of California agreed to return approximately $36,000 in cash seized from one defendant in this narcotic prosecution after 2 exiled Contra supporters wrote letters filed with the court that the money was for the reinstatement of democracy in Nicaragua, and that is in quote. So therefore, I look forward to hearing from the Inspector General concerning his findings that there's no information that the CIA had any connection with the defendants in the Frogman case, and that there's no information that the Contras benefited from the drug trafficking of the Frogman case. And I also anticipate questions as whether officials of the CIA hampered in any way the investigation of the prosecution of this matter, because it hits us so directly at home in our community in Northern California. I still have some questions, even though I have reviewed the report. Once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing us to have these questions out in the open.
Thank you, Ms. Pelosi. Mr. Skaggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I join in thanking the chair for calling these hearings. Want as well to express my respect and appreciation for Mr. Dixon's contribution to this effort, but want to make a special point of recognizing the public service of Fred Hitz to the country and to the Central Intelligence Agency. I've known him for some time, independent of his current position. And what I have to say, I think, really picks up on Ms. Harmon's comment about trust. Even this committee, authorized and assisted as we are by able staff to look into the workings of the intelligence community, ultimately have to rely on trust ourselves in sorting out fact from fiction, from innuendo. The key individual with regard to the Central Intelligence Agency in establishing and nurturing a sense of trustworthiness in all of this is the Inspector General in the person of Mr. Hitz. I believe his conduct in office and his execution of his responsibilities have been absolutely key during my service on the committee to establishing the kind of trustworthiness in both directions that enables us to do our work for our colleagues and for the American people. And Fred, I just want to say thank you very much and Godspeed.
Thank you, Mr. Skaggs. Ms. Gibbons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I join my colleagues in commending you for having this hearing today, and I want to thank you for bringing it before the public as well. The importance and the seriousness of the allegations that have been before this committee on this issue merit this type of a hearing, and especially the proper resolution that this hearing can give this matter is critical. Critical both to the confidence of the American people in their agencies, critical to this oversight committee in its work that it must do in looking at and deciding these types of issues. You know, our nation depends upon this information, and it must have the confidence in the information that it is not tainted by any illegal act, an act that might undermine our ability to rely on this information. And it must not have any taint of illegality for the agency itself. Those agencies that provide valuable intelligence for anti-drug, economic, or military information must themselves, as I've said earlier, be untainted by illegal acts or even the innuendo of an illegality. The importance of this hearing today will hopefully clear the air on these issues, rebuild the confidence between the citizens of this country and our intelligence agencies, and finally, help in an equally important matter to rebuild the credibility and our confidence in the information and intelligence that we receive from these agencies. The men and women of our intelligence gathering agencies deserve no less than our complete confidence in their work to promote a better America. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses, welcoming them here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Opening statements are completed. It's at this time that we welcome colleagues who are not on the committee for their commentary on the report that is the subject of this hearing. It is the report of the investigation, allegations of connections between CIA and the Contras and cocaine trafficking to the United States, Volume 1, The California Story, January 29, 1998, as presented by Frederick P. Hitz, who we will be hearing from. It had been my intention to call members in order of seniority, but I have been advised that the senior member of the two that we expected to hear from has deferred to Juanita Melinda McDonald to come forward first, since you have been out front in trying to help us on this matter and come to grips with it, and that indeed have had hearings in your district and have had direct involvement. And we welcome you today. We welcome your commentary on the report and any observations you may have for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Before I begin my testimony, please allow me a moment to express my appreciation to you, Chairman Goss, and you, Ranking Member Dix, for your efforts and those of your colleagues on the House Permanent Select Committee of Intelligence to wade through the morass of allegations stemming from press reports of the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement in drug trafficking in South Central Los Angeles. I would especially like to acknowledge my Southern California colleagues on the committee, Congress members Jerry Lewis, Julian Dixon, and Jane Harmon, as well as Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Maxine Waters and California Delegation Co-Chairwoman Lucille Roybal-Allard. Their support of my efforts to give voice to the concerns of my constituents in the immediate aftermath of the controversial press reports alleging CIA wrongdoing was encouraging and meant a great deal to me and the residents of California's 37th Congressional District. Mr. Chairman and committee members, I commend the Chairman for fulfilling his commitment to hold this hearing. Like the Chairman, I too was deeply disturbed by the allegations as reported in the San Jose Mercury News in August of 1996 of the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement in the introduction, financing, and distribution of crack cocaine in the 1980s. Consequently, I contacted administration officials, the appropriate leaders of the House of Representatives, and even the former UN Secretary General to ask their respective organizations to look into these allegations. I also wrote to the mayors of major urban cities, many of whom responded by confirming that their cities witnessed a significant increase in drug trafficking and proliferation of cocaine use and abuse during the same time period. On September 11th, I introduced House Resolution 518 to establish a special select committee to look into these allegations. I did so, Mr. Chairman, not with any intent to slay the Permanent Select Committee, but because I believe the persistence of issues raised by this and other controversies about the CIA's accountability, the agency's ability to investigate itself, the public's desire and need for the truth, and the agency's mission in a post-Cold War world require much broader congressional involvement in these important proceedings. As many of you are aware, I convened 2 town hall meetings in the fall of 1996. In response to the widespread feelings of anxiety, public outrage, and concern throughout my district in the wake of news accounts which seemed to implicate the CIA in drug trafficking in the early and mid-1980s in South Central Los Angeles and urban America. The first town hall meeting at Compton Community College on October 19, 1996, was attended by hundreds of residents from my drug-ravaged community. The purpose of the Compton Congressional Inquiry was to educate myself and other members of Congress about the specific issues raised by allegations of U.S. government involvement in and knowledge of drug trafficking in South Central Los Angeles. I also sought out how the local community responded to the widespread harm caused by the scourge of substance abuse, regardless of the source or cause, and allowed them to seek answers to these allegations. I invited the Justice Inspector General, Michael Bromwich, to come and meet with leaders and members of the community so that they could express their concerns. Mr. Bromwich observed the proceedings of the congressional inquiry and took notes with a number of panelists testifying, including Ricky Ross' mother and Ricky Ross himself, via telephone from the San Jose Detention Center. On November 15th, in response to my invitation, then Director of Central Intelligence, John Dortch, made an unprecedented visit to Allen Locke High School in the Watts section of my district to directly address the concerns raised by my constituents and me, generated by these allegations during a public town hall meeting. His visit illustrated a new openness within the agency to wrestle with the issues raised by the San Jose Mercury News press reports, as well as the persistent skepticism with which the CIA denials of wrongdoing have been met by the public. Those media reports, some of which have since been retracted, suggested that the crack cocaine trade, which has devastated whole communities, was promulgated by official government activities under the aegis of the Central Intelligence Agency. While the public forum received widespread media coverage, a private meeting with community leaders, activists, and elected officials provided them with an opportunity to express their concerns and pose their questions directly to former Director Dortch. I am here today to articulate some of the concerns my constituents and I have about this report and the ongoing controversy. First, this report is merely the first volume of 2 and focuses on the allegations of connections between the CIA and the Contras as alleged in the San Jose Mercury News. A second unpublished volume presumes to address the findings related to the CIA's knowledge of any other alleged drug trafficking by the Contras or other persons associated with the Contra operation. Release of a third report prepared by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice has been withheld on order of the Attorney General. Consequently, the results of the internal investigations by the CIA and the Department of Justice have yet to materialize. Therefore, the report is limited in scope. Nevertheless, several questions related to this first volume continue to be raised. Did CIA personnel or assets have any involvement in supplying or assisting drug traffickers in South Central Los Angeles and or elsewhere? The report answers this question in the negative. However, what are we to make of the questions raised by Defense Attorney Harold Braun, a panelist at the October 19th inquiry, who maintains that a suspect in the custody of the Los Angeles County Deputy Sheriff's was allowed to make a long-distance telephone call to Virginia after asserting he worked for the CIA? What evidence do we have in this report that this allegation was or is being pursued, given the report does not mention investigation of telephone logs? And if so, why? Did the CIA aggressively pursue its role, concluding the charge to collect, produce, and disseminate intelligence on foreign aspects of narcotics production and trafficking when it received information about possible Contra involvement in drug trafficking? We apparently have to wait until Volume 2 to know the answer to this question. However, the information provided in this report suggests that the CIA turned a blind eye, at best, to information that suggests drug trafficking by Contra operatives. Did the CIA personnel intercede on behalf of any Nicaraguan Contra figures or nationals opposed to the Sandinistas government in any drug-related investigation or prosecution by local, state, or federal personnel? This report responds to specific allegations, but the report does not address what the CIA could or should have done in pursuing the portion of the agency's charge that relates to collecting, producing, and disseminating intelligence on foreign aspects of narcotics production and trafficking. It remains unclear to me what the CIA actually did to investigate or direct its intelligence assets to determine whether any Contras were engaged in drug trafficking. Should the 250,000 pages of documents reviewed for this first volume be declassified and made available for public inspection? And the ultimate question is, can the CIA investigate itself? The Central Intelligence is unique among government agencies. By its very nature, the CIA's secrets and the rules of confidentiality make investigations difficult. Investigations into wrongdoing start at a disadvantage which turns the usual rules of American justice on its head, as the presumption of innocence is compromised by the agency's secrecy and the classification of documents. We are being asked to trust career employees of the agency to sort out and report the truth in the name of national security. Indeed, news reports which followed leaks regarding the content of this report last December suggest that some CIA personnel were neither nor seriously interviewed nor not questioned at all about what they knew. As a result, the public remains skeptical. Some will perceive that this hearing is premature and that this report by itself does not adequately address the allegations of the San Jose Mercury News that prompted the public outcry. To its credit, the series shed light on some very real problems that require real solutions, from substance abuse to CIA accountability. I look forward to subsequent hearings by this committee upon release of the other reports, at which time we may all be in a better position to make judgments. Nevertheless, I hope that the Select Committee will give their content, methodologies, and findings the scrutiny they deserve, and in a similar spirit of openness, make themselves available to my constituents to respond to any questions these reports generate. I believe such openness is critical to restoration of the credibility and public trust necessary to allow intelligence gathering activities, which by their nature are secretive, to coexist with democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melinda McDonald. That was a very fine statement, and you've raised some specific questions for the committee to take under consideration, and we shall. Just needed to advise you, your observation that some may consider this hearing premature. Interestingly enough, there are some who consider it to be late as well. It's hard to get it all right all the time. One of the reasons we felt it was important to have this hearing at this time is because Mr. Hitz is on to greater glories with new employment, we are advised, and we wanted to make sure we had the opportunity for him to explain his report to us as he could, and that is why we decided to do this today.
And Mr. Chairman, there's some of the problems that my constituents have. They say by the time they get accustomed to one person, he then leaves, and there's a new person on the horizon, and therefore they're not just true. They're not really sure whether or not those persons really have their teeth into the feelings and the emotions that have been raised by my constituents.
It's a fair observation, I'm sure, from your constituents' point of view. I assure you we intend to keep our teeth in this until we finish, and I don't plan to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think any of my other colleagues, well, none of my other colleagues are planning to leave except to stay involved.
It seems that is also premature.
To stay involved in any way they profitably can for the good of public service.
Thank you so much for the testimony.
Thank you very much, ma'am. At this time, then, I would call Maxine Waters from California's 35th District, and we are pleased to have you before us today, Maxine, to talk about the report that is being provided to us by Mr. Hitz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing. Certainly, it's not expected of the Intelligence Committee, and I'm very pleased that we have so many members present today. And I'd like to beg your indulgence. I know you spoke of a time limit, but it is very difficult to talk about all of this information in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I possibly can. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm here today to testify about the failure of the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct a serious and thorough investigation into the allegations of CIA involvement in cocaine trafficking to fund its Contra war activities. Unfortunately, my fear that the CIA would be unable to investigate itself has been confirmed with this report. The Inspector General's report lacks credibility. It is fraught with contradictions and illogical conclusions. In a September 3rd, 1996 memo, then CIA Director John Deutsch laid out the framework for this investigation. In his instructions to CIA Inspector General Frederick P. Hitz, Director Deutsch stated, "I have no reason to believe that there is any substance to the allegations published in the Mercury News." Despite his premature conclusion, a serious, substantial, and credible investigation and interview process would have proven him wrong. If the CIA director's premature conclusion was meant to direct the final outcome, he has succeeded. This report's sweeping denial of the CIA's knowledge of drug trafficking related to the Contras defies the evidence and the logic that the CIA should have known. From the days of the CIA's first response to the allegations raised in the Dark Alliance series, many skeptics believed that the CIA could never produce a credible or truthful review of wrongdoings by its own agency. These skeptics could point, if they'd like, to this Sunday's Los Angeles Times to confirm their fears. The Times reported, in another case, that after 37 years, the CIA finally admitted publicly the most profound deception imaginable on an American family. Thomas Pete Ray and his top secret squadron of National Guard bombers were shot down during a CIA bombing mission in the Bay of Pigs debacle. For 37 years, the CIA denied that Mr. Ray and his squadron even existed, much less were shot down by Cuban troops in 1961. Only this month, faced with a document obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request by the National Security Archives, did the CIA finally admit the truth 37 years later. My deep concern about the allegations raised in the Dark Alliance series that my government could have in any way been involved in or had knowledge of drug trafficking has caused me to spend much of my own time and resources to find out more about these allegations. After reading the Dark Alliance series, I interviewed Gary Webb, the writer of the series. And by the way, Mr. Chairman and members, Mr. Gary Webb is here today. He's sitting right here in this seat, and I invited him to come. He's put a lot of time and work into this investigation, and I have been working with him since the first day that I read it, and I think that he should be privy to all information as he continues his work in this area. I interviewed Gary Webb, the writer of the series. I invited him to come to my district in South Central Los Angeles to respond to questions from local residents. My community encouraged my investigation and supported me in my efforts to delve deeper into these allegations. I personally interviewed a number of key figures in the Dark Alliance series. I first met with and interviewed Mr. Alan Finster, who was the attorney for Ricky Ross. Then I drove to San Diego to the Metropolitan Detention Center, where I interviewed Mr. Ricky Ross, the young man who was trafficking in drugs in South Central Los Angeles that were being sold to him by Mr. Norman Meneses and Mr. Danilo Blandone. He was being held in the Metropolitan Detention Center facility on drug charges. I also then drove to a restaurant in the Valley where I met with Mr. Celerino Castillo, the DEA agent who had investigated the drug trafficking operation at Ilopango Airfield in El Salvador. Castillo had documented that the CIA directed this drug trafficking operation out of 2 hangars using Contra Supply Network as a route for shipping drugs into the United States. I then interviewed former LAPD officer Mike Rupert, who states he was forced to leave the LAPD after he uncovered a connection between the CIA and narcotic trafficking operations in California and Louisiana. Mr. Rupert also was interviewed by the CIA for its report. I met and had numerous telephone conversations with Mr. Jerry Gazzetta, a detective with the City of Bell and a key member of the multi-agency task force working with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department investigating the Blandone narcotics operation. Gazzetta was a level 1 informant whose information was the basis of the affidavit of LA Sheriff Tom Gorton that resulted in the October 1986 raid of the Blandone operation's 14 sites in Southern California. I visited the Records Division of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and uncovered the sheriff's reports regarding the October 1986 drug bust. I was the first to obtain the copies of the documentation regarding the raids. They had said prior to that time that they did not exist, they could not be found, and I literally went in and by accident was able to access these documents, and they quickly tried to retrieve them from me, and of course I refused to leave until I had copies of what should have been public documents. On January 3rd, 1997, using my own personal funds, I flew to Nicaragua to meet with Enrique Miranda Jaime, a former Sandinista official and drug partner of Norman Meneses, a central figure in the Allegations in the Dark Alliance series. I was contacted by someone who had information about the Colombian cartels and their connection to Norman Meneses. When I arrived in Nicaragua, I was taken to the prison in the town of Grenada by State Department representatives where I met with Miranda himself. Mr. Miranda told me some of the information that he gave to the CIA in this investigation, which is reported on pages 54 and 55 of the IG's report. Mr. Randa currently is in prison after being convicted for smuggling 764 kilos of cocaine with his partner Norman Meneses. Meneses told Miranda in detail that Meneses worked for the Contras and that his drug trafficking operation had the support of the CIA. Meneses also told Miranda that he was receiving support directly from Oliver North and passing on the funds to support Contra groups. I met with Mr. Thomas Borge, a former Sandinista interior minister and head of intelligence. Mr. Borge came to meet with me from Nicaragua to South Central Los Angeles and waited for hours until I completed a day-long schedule, and I then spent some 4 hours with him. I have also had numerous telephone conversations with Corel Talavera Baca, the girlfriend of Rafael Cornejo, who was a relative and part of Norman Meneses' drug trafficking organization, as well as a longtime business partner of Danilo Blandone, another central figure in the Dark Alliance series. I received information from Ms. Baca and Mr. Cornejo, who were connected to Carlos Ledera, a Colombian drug dealer and co-founder of the Medellin cartel. It was through Ledera's private island that the Medellin cartel moved massive amounts of cocaine to Miami and the United States. Ms. Baca had visited Carlos Ledera's private island and have information regarding the connection between Mr. Ledera and Norman Meneses. I've had over a half-dozen telephone conversations with her, and she has sent me information relative to that operation. I have looked into many of the main allegations raised in Gary Webb's series, and I've thoroughly reviewed the Inspector General's report. In addition, I have read many letters and reviewed volumes of information sent to me and have visited a large number of people who have claimed to have information about the drug dealing in South Central Los Angeles. In my informed opinion, Mr. Chairman, the CIA IG report and the investigation lacks credibility, and its conclusions must be dismissed. Let me turn to some of the specifics of the Inspector General's report. The average reader likely will find the structure of this report bizarre and confusing. I also question the report's methodology, its sweeping conclusions, its cleverly worded denials, and its selective quoting of documents. The report states that 365 interviews were conducted, but only summarizes statements from 12 individuals connected to the South Central Los Angeles specific allegations. I have a list of over 70 individuals who should have been interviewed under oath by the CIA if the investigation was to be considered credible. Did the CIA interview all of these people? Because the report fails to list who was actually interviewed. We have no way of knowing. In addition, only 40 pages of this report, titled The California Story, actually deal with the allegations of the South Central crack cocaine Contra connection. The report mentions a half-dozen other CIA and Contra officials interviewed, but does not offer even a cursory summary of their testimony. So let me do what the report failed to do. The following individuals associated with the Contras are or were either CIA agents or CIA assets. Now, I'm going to name these individuals, and I'm going to say to you, Mr. Chairman and members, that even though the report cleverly refers to agents, we should be talking about agents and or assets. I am going to say to you today in no uncertain terms, Mr. Adolfo Calero was a CIA asset, and he didn't just start with Norwin Meneses. He started working with the American Embassy as a CIA asset, and many of the funds for aid were funneled through him. Mr. Enrique Bermudez was a CIA asset. Mr. Marcos Aguado, a Contra pilot and accused drug dealer. Mr. Francisco Aviles, a Contra official in Costa Rica. In the Frogman case, Mr. Ivan Gomez, CIA agent who accepted drug money from Mr. Meneses. Mr. Dagoberto Nunes, who ran a shrimp company for the Oliver North in Costa Rica. Rene Corvo, a Cuban-American who worked with the Contras in Costa Rica. Mr. Francisco Shanz, owner of the shrimp company for Oliver North in Costa Rica. Mr. Edmundo Meneses, American-trained Nicaraguan general and Norwin Meneses' brother. Mr. Sebastian Gonzalez, Contra leader in Costa Rica and drug partner of Meneses. I assert here today that these are all CIA assets, and I would challenge this committee to ask the Inspector General and others, perhaps in the CIA, to document for you whether or not my allegations are true. They should give you sworn testimony as to whether or not they have knowledge about the people that I'm submitting to you being assets of the CIA. Today, I'm asking this committee to obtain the written response from the CIA that either categorically confirms or denies they are or were CIA assets or agents. Another major problem with the investigation underlying the report was the CIA's lack of subpoena power. This meant that some of the most important CIA and other officials were never interviewed. 3 former unnamed senior CIA managers would only respond in writing. 6 other key CIA personnel and former DE agent Castillo refused to be interviewed. The CIA agents included Dwayne Claridge, Joseph Fernandez, and Claire George. All of these senior CIA officials had major responsibilities for the CIA's Contra operation. There can be no thorough investigation without sworn testimony from each of these individuals. They should be subpoenaed. Jose Fernandez was the former CIA station chief in Costa Rica, while the Meneses drug organization was operating from there. Dwayne Dewey Claridge was the CIA officer who helped create the Contras at a time when the Meneses ring first began dealing cocaine for the FDN. His name also appeared in Oliver North's notebooks as being responsible for making quid pro quo deals with known drug king Manuel Noriega. Claridge summed up how serious he thought that this investigation was when he told reporters in December 1997 that the CIA, quote, sent me questions that were bullshit, and I wrote back, they were a bunch of bullshit. When I spoke with journalists following the release of the report this past January, much to my surprise, they had to admit to me they had not even read the entire report. They admitted they had only read the glossy 8-page summary, which offered up unsubstantiated conclusions of the CIA's innocence and blanket denials of the Dark Alliance serious allegations. Had they only read the report in its entirety as I did, they would have learned that allegations of drug trafficking and connections between the Contras and the CIA were not new. In fact, the report even lists and summarizes some of the other investigations that found Contra involvement in drug trafficking. For example, the Senate Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations, chaired by Senator John Kerry, conducted a 2-year investigation into allegations of Contra involvement in drugs and arms trafficking. The CIA Inspector General report summarizes some of the Kerry Commission's 1,166-page report's devastating findings on page 35 through 38. These are some of the admissions. Drug traffickers use the Contra war and their ties to the Contra as cover for their criminal enterprises in Honduras and Costa Rica. Assistance from the drug lords was crucial to the Contras. And the traffickers, in turn, promoted and protected their operations by associating with the Contra movement. Drug traffickers provided support to the Contras and used the supply network of the Contras. Contras knowingly received both financial and material assistance from the drug traffickers. In each case, one or another U.S. government agency had information regarding these matters either while they were occurring or immediately thereafter. Members of the Contra movement were involved in drug trafficking, including pilots who flew supplies for the Contras, mercenaries who worked for the Contras, and Contra supporters throughout Central America. Drug traffickers helped in the Contra supply operations through business relations with Contra groups. Drug traffickers contribute cash, weapons, planes, pilots, air supply services, and other materials to the Contras. U.S. Department funds authorized by Congress for humanitarian assistance was paid to drug traffickers. In some cases, these drug traffickers received the State Department's funds after having been indicted by federal law enforcement agencies on drug charges. In other cases, were the subject of pending investigations by those agencies. The FDN Contra Group moved Contra funds through a narcotics, drug trafficking, and money laundering operation. Drug trafficking for the Contra movement was done by some because they were told that their actions were either on behalf of or sanctioned by the U.S. government. Not included in the CIA IG report are other key findings by the Kerry Committee. Despite widespread trafficking through the war zones of northern Costa Rica, the Kerry Committee was unable to find a single case which was made on the basis of a tip or a report by an official of a U.S. intelligence agency. This, despite an executive order requiring intelligence agencies to report drug trafficking to law enforcement officials, and despite direct testimony that drug trafficking on the southern front was reported to the CIA officials. U.S. officials involved with the Contras knew that drug traffickers were using the Contra infrastructure and that the Contras were receiving assistance from drug profits. Yet they turned a blind eye and did not report these individuals to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. How can this report include these incriminating findings by elected officials, including Senators Kerry, Brock, and Moynihan, while others summarily dismissing any CIA knowledge of or involvement in Contra drug trafficking into the U.S. This is an outrageous contradiction. Moreover, the report is littered with damaging admissions. This report admits Norman Meneses was one of the biggest drug dealers in America, either north and south, and he supplied Danilo Blandone. Blandone, in turn, was the source who supplied Ricky Ross, and Blandone and Meneses did so unhindered by the CIA. It is unreasonable to think Meneses was connected to the CIA, given the Contras were a CIA creation and that the CIA handled every aspect of the Contra operation. Pages 20 through 24 of this report confirms that the CIA essentially created, funded, supplied, and trained the Contras, and that the CIA was intimately involved in determining their strategy and running their operations. Meneses was never arrested by U.S. law enforcement. He was permitted free entrance to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue? Let me just say that Meneses dealt drugs in the United States for over 10 years or more. Starting back in 1974, he was a drug dealer before he came to the United States. He was even involved in a murder in Nicaragua. He dealt drugs without any interference, without any intervention. He had assets and businesses in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, Congresswoman Pelosi referred to the Frogman case. When they tracked down some of Meneses' people, they tracked them to the very house that was connected with the Frogman case where many of those people were involved. Meneses was well known by the CIA, the DEA, the DIA, and everybody in the United States as a drug dealer who was supplying Danilo Blandone, who was supplying Ricky Ross. How he stayed in the United States all of those years, being known from 1974, selling drugs that ended up helping to support the Contras, and nobody, but nobody knew it, is absolutely amazing. Meneses was never arrested by the U.S. enforcement. He was permitted free entrance again to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue? The CIA and DEA records are full of knowledge about Meneses' drug dealing operation. This knowledge was substantiated in this report. Even this report. The CIA knew of his drug trafficking by 1984, and the DEA had known of his trafficking activities as early as 1974. Incredibly, the report fails to mention anything about the activities of Adolfo Calero, only mentioning that he was interviewed. He was the key Contra leader and CIA agent on the Southern Front. Damning public information ties Calero to drug trafficking. In a December 1986 interview, Calero told the Costa Rican newspaper La Nacion that he met with drug kingpin Norman Meneses at least 6 times, and that he knew Meneses was involved in drug trafficking. Now, in our investigations, we had found out that Meneses had met with Adolfo Calero, and that Meneses and Blandone had been going to these meetings both in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, despite the fact that these conclusions of these drug dealers having no connection to the Contras. Thank goodness your report did identify 6 visits. We only knew about 2. We have a picture of Meneses and Adolfo Calero and others at one of these Contra meetings that were going on all over California. In addition, there are many other key facts that were confirmed by this report. Drug kingpin Norman Meneses supported and was involved with the Contras. On page 76-77, drug dealer Norman Meneses admitted giving money to the California chapter of the FDN Contras and that he was involved in the 1985 attempt to obtain material support, medical and general supplies for the Contra movement. Now, there are a lot of discrepancies about how much. You will find in your report it differs somewhat with information that was testified to over on the Senate side when they held the semblance of a hearing over there. I have maintained that it does not matter how much money. It does not matter whether or not it was, as Eden Pastora testified on that side, that he only got a few $1,000s and a couple of trucks, or it is an admission that Norman Meneses supplied about $40,000 plus medical supplies and other things. The fact of the matter is, the reason I'm so interested in this and the reason I'm so outraged by it, as a public elected officials, all of us must be concerned that our government could have anyway been involved in drug trafficking. Drug trafficking. That's a very, very serious offense against the people of this nation. We cannot afford to have our government, I don't care under what pretense, a covert operation or any kind of operation, involved in drug trafficking. Page 70 to 71 of the report documents the connection between CIA asset and FDN military leader Enrique Bermudez, Meneses, and Blandón. Blandón and Meneses traveled to Bolivia in 1982 to make a drug deal and stopped en route to Honduras. While in Honduras, Blandón and Meneses met Bermudez for the second time. Bermudez asked Blandón and Meneses to help raise money and supplies for the FDN. He let the drug traffickers know that their support would be welcome because, I quote, and everybody quotes, even your reported quotes, that he said, "The ends justifies the means." Blandón then describes how he and Meneses were escorted to airport by armed Contras after the meeting with Bermudez. Blandón left the meeting. He left this meeting with $100,000 in a bag to buy drugs. The profits from the sale of these drugs were to be used to buy supplies and fund the Contras. Blandón tells of how he ran into trouble at the airport in Honduras when he was caught with the $100,000. But guess what? Just like in the Frogman case, where they caught them with the dope and the money, and they returned the $36,000 based on that attorney general that you had in San Francisco having been told that it was Contra money, this man with $100,000 in drug money to buy more drugs for more supplies was assisted by the Contras at the airport. And even though they had stopped him, they had taken $100,000 out of his brief. With the intervention of the Contras, they gave it back to him. And he went along his merry way. Where did the $100,000 come from?
Begin to conclude the remarks.
Yes, I'm
very
going
much
to get
appreciate
there.
We've been over generous. We're taking away from time for the
I appreciate Mr. Goss, and I
know
tried
you have
to
written
say
remarks
that
which we will
You know, the gate's open. You know, do your thing, man. Here, give him some Coke. All Charlie's friends get free Coke.